Yeah. Welcome back to the second segment of this conversation on partnerships for a rules-based order in the Indo-Pacific. We are joined by Ambassador Atul Keshav, America's top diplomat to India, someone who has intimate knowledge of the region and indeed of the politics of the region. We have Ms. Velina Chakarova, Director of the Australian Institute for European and Security Policy, and she has been following many of the political developments in Europe and indeed in the Indo-Pacific. And joining them is Dr. Daniel Twining, President of the International Republican Institute. And we are in some ways going to continue the conversation we started with the ministers and in many ways ask them to share their perspectives. Let me quickly get into this conversation by first posing my question to Ambassador Keshav. Ambassador Keshav, welcome to the forum. You have had a front row seat to the evolving competition that is now unfolding in the Indo-Pacific. I would like to know from you an American perspective on this region, on the role of actors such as India and the EU. And of course, perhaps you could also comment on what does Afghanistan do to America's commitment to this political project? Does it strengthen the resolve? Does it damage the image? Let me turn to you, Ambassador Keshav.
Yeah, thanks, Samir. I think it needed a remote unlock over there. Anyway, look, let me first of all say what a delight it was to see you host the previous session. Very informative as always. And huge thanks to our friends in Slovenia for bringing us all together. Great to see Dan and Velina. Very happy to be on this panel with them. And you've asked a great question. So number one, something that's extremely obvious is that the Indo-Pacific is of compelling importance for the United States and always has been and always will be. We've always been an Indo-Pacific power. We established a consulate in Calcutta in 1794. So we knew exactly where the Indo-Pacific was going back to the very earliest days of our republic. And we have remained an Indo-Pacific power throughout, and we intend to remain an Indo-Pacific power. What we welcome entirely is Europe's increasing attention on the Indo-Pacific, and of course, India's abiding interest in the Indo-Pacific. We welcome partners who recognize the region's importance to global economic prosperity, strengthening the democratic order, and maintaining a stable, rules-based international framework. I'll talk a little bit about what Secretary of State Blinken said. He talked about the centrality of the Indo-Pacific and its role in global geopolitics in a joint opinion piece that he issued with Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin in the Washington Post earlier this year, where he said, and I'll quote, "The Indo-Pacific region is increasingly the center of global geopolitics. It is home to billions of the world's people, several established and rising powers, and 5 of America's treaty allies. Plus, a great deal of the world's trade travels through its sea lanes." I've heard from you, and I won't have to reiterate it, but the region accounts for over half the world's population and increasingly more and more of the world's GDP. It is also home to some of the world's largest militaries. Our feeling, our very strong feeling, is that all sovereign nations will prosper through the respect for freedom of commerce, a rules-based international order, and the peaceful resolution of disputes in accordance with international law. The U.S. vision for the Indo-Pacific is based on a responsibility to promote peace and prosperity in the region and drive sustainable growth and development. We believe that a free, open, and prosperous Indo-Pacific is a national priority for the United States, and we need to be active in the region to address both new and traditional threats. Obviously, we could talk about those threats, but I would say that with regard to European activity, I was very privileged to join Deputy Secretary of State Wendy Sherman in Brussels back in June. We had superb conversations with our European friends, and we're greatly encouraged by the amount of attention being made by various countries in Europe and by the EU writ large to looking at their outlook on the Indo-Pacific and their policies toward this very important region. We're seeing more and more activity by Europe in the region, including military deployments, and we welcome that as a good thing because we believe that our European friends and allies and democratic partners uphold the same values that we do, just like India upholds the same values. I was at a banquet that Indian Chief of Defense Staff General Bipin Rawat hosted for Indo-Pacific Commander John Aquilino, Admiral John Aquilino. And at the end of our Indian colleagues' toast, I said, General, we could have written those remarks. We are talking about the exact same things. We offer the same mantras and the same shlokas about how we view the Indo-Pacific and how we view India's role and our role. And frankly, I think all democracies share the same perspective because we all believe in a rules-based international order. So I think it's important that we all work together. We all work in coordination. We find ways to be complementary toward each other. And we're going to continue to engage with India both bilaterally as a trusted partner and natural ally, and also as part of the Quad, which has been a project long coming, but intensifying more and more. And we absolutely welcome a greater role by Europe in the Indo-Pacific. I can't speak for our Indian friends. They can speak for themselves on this, but from the U.S. perspective, it's great to see the Queen Elizabeth in Guam, or sailing through the South China Sea, or working with us in the Indian Ocean. That is exactly the kind of energy and activity we want. It's great to see the French, who always remind us that they are a three-ocean power and have population in three different oceans and military presence in three different oceans. The French bring great values, true of so many of our European friends. So, we have a long history of working with Europe in close coordination, especially on transatlantic issues, and we welcome the opportunity to intensify and deepen that coordination across the vast Indo-Pacific. And you asked about Afghanistan, Samir. Look, I don't do Afghanistan. I work on advancing the U.S.-India bilateral partnership. But I will tell you that if you look at any of our long-term partnerships and friendships across the Indo-Pacific, those have lasted for decades and decades, and we are an abiding and reliable partner to Japan, to Korea, to Australia, to New Zealand, and to many others. And we have rapidly evolving relationships all across the region. And so I think you can, I hope, appreciate that the U.S. Certainly stands by its strategic commitments and makes the best decisions that it can in order to telegraph its values around the region and help ensure prosperity and stability, not just for itself, but for all of its friends. Over.
Thank you, Ambassador. Can I go to you, Belina? You've been studying China and Russia quite closely. In fact, you have coined a geopolitical term, dragon bear. Now, if you were sitting either in Moscow or Beijing, and you were seeing these images come out of Afghanistan, what would you be thinking today? And more broadly, how do you think Moscow and Beijing view the Indo-Pacific partnerships that are emerging, be it the EU and India, be it the Quad, be it even our partners in Africa? What is your assessment of what's happening here?
So thank you, Samir, for the invitation, and congratulations to an excellent panel. And of course, an excellent Blatt Strategic Forum. Now, I will skip the Schadenfreude, and I will move directly to the more pragmatic long-term repercussions. Now, although there is not yet an open ideological competition, as we all know, the US and Western-led liberal international order is in fact already threatened by the growing influence of China and Russia. So this dragon bear that I coined in 2015 to point to a dangerous systemic coordination between these two actors in key domains and fields is actually operating within the existing global order with a clear goal of disrupting it, dismantling its multilateral structures, and creating better conditions for its own notion of multilateralism, which is strictly opposed to Western norms, values, and rules of the game. So coordinated efforts by China and Russia in the UN Security Council, for instance, regarding Syria, Iran, and now we've seen already Afghanistan, but also other international and regional organizations will continue to grow as both states seek to improve their international image as norm setters in a rapidly changing geopolitical global order. So all relevant actors, now the dragon bear on the one side, but also the United States, the European Union, and other regional actors are in fact interested in integrating South and Central Asia through various connectivity, transportation, trade corridors. We've heard a lot about it from the panel discussion. At the same time, they are already competing for influence in implementing major energy, infrastructure, transport, and connectivity projects, and that is definitely going to be the case in Afghanistan. So what it means is that Beijing and Moscow are already preparing, and they have been preparing prior to the US troops withdrawal to fill the void in Afghanistan. However, the approach will be a different one. Beijing is unlikely to make the same mistakes in this regard as the US and the former Soviet Union did. Mm-hmm. So rather than fighting against the Taliban or antagonizing them, Beijing is more likely to accommodate them in order to leverage the country's resources and facilitate the necessary networks within the BRI, the Belt and Road Initiative, but also the China, Pakistan, Afghanistan economic corridor. So they see Afghanistan as a major geopolitical puzzle piece of a bigger game, and that would be to connect Afghanistan, Pakistan, Iran, and then of course move towards Asia, from Asia towards Africa, and of course Europe. And that also means, in the long term, access to the Indian Ocean, power projection in the Indian Ocean, and that is something to be carefully observed post US withdrawal from Afghanistan. So following this withdrawal, multilateralism, in my view, is becoming a kind of a buzzword, as Western institutions, but also the Western understanding of multilateralism is becoming more or less a playground, not only for diplomatic, but also for geopolitical, realpolitik battles between competing powers, which is a similar case as what we've observed during the Cold War era. And here, the most important part is, of course, a systemic rivalry between the United States and China. And then the open question mark is as to whether all important regional powers, including India, including European powers, and of course other relevant ones, will have to take either or decision in the long term. So I will stop here and then we can move on.
Thank you, Velina. Dan, you've been working on the whole concept of creating value-based partnerships around the world. IRI has done stellar work. You yourself have been working with democracies around the world. We have liberally used rules-based order, value-based partnerships, democratic communities as our mantra. How many takers do you think exist for this kind of a proposition in the Indo-Pacific today, especially after what happened in Afghanistan and in recent days, including the vaccine question that our previous speaker from Kenya spoke about?
Samir, thank you. It's such a pleasure to be here with you and Atul, both old friends, and with Velina, whose institute we work with. And we're very proud of our partnership with the BLED Strategic Forum, so congratulations all around. That's a lot of questions, Samir. I'll be very brief. You know, the argument for, I think, a values-based diplomacy and a values-based vision in the Indo-Pacific, it's not meant to be exclusive. It's not meant to, you know, produce some kind of new Cold War. The idea, frankly, is a very practical one, which is that democracies enjoy a higher quality of engagement and partnership and alliance with each other. And it goes back to something Foreign Minister of External Affairs Jai Shankar said in the previous segment, which is that there's just a qualitatively different matter of trust when groups like the Quad sit down, groups like NATO sit down. It's different, right? So let's be mindful of that when it comes to vaccines, when it comes to pandemic response, when it comes to working on climate and energy matters, when it comes to dealing with violent extremism and terrorism. Our closest allies and partners are democracies. That's as true of India as it is true for Europe, as it is true for the United States. That doesn't mean we're not going to be very pragmatic. It doesn't mean we're not going to work with everyone whenever we can. But in fact, I think the proposition here is that there is a contest underway in the world, and there is a rising authoritarian superpower with a very malign vision that is a threat to all free societies. And that fundamentally is of central concern to free and open societies who want to sustain a free and open world. So the term I prefer, Samir, is a free and open world. I think we can all agree on that, which of course is rules-based, which of course leans in a liberal direction. With regard to Afghanistan, this has been gut-wrenching for all of us who have worked on this issue for the past few decades. I will say there was some schadenfreude in Russia and China in particular, but then there was sort of a more immediate recognition that, wait, maybe we should take the President of the United States seriously. He says he wants to free up resources and energy and bandwidth to run an effective strategic competition. The President of the United States believes that the central contest in the world today is one between free and open societies and malign authoritarian revisionist powers. And that should actually be of concern to China and Russia and other competitors. It shouldn't be something that they are celebrating. I do think we have an obligation to Afghan friends and partners we left behind. I personally thought the withdrawal was a mistake. We know that jihadists and social extremists are celebrating around the world that this is actually empowering the very malevolent actors who pose a very real danger to free and open societies in Europe, in India, in the United States. So we're not going to hear the end of this. I'm afraid we're just looking at the beginning of another chapter, but last thing, Samir, the US-India counterterrorism partnership has grown in leaps and bounds. The US-Europe partnership, obviously through NATO, is so strong in CT and other areas. And it's just a reminder that we have common challenges and that the greatest dangers to our free and open societies are posed by autocracies, failed states, violent extremists.
Dan, let me ask you a second question before I turn to Ambassador Keshav. And I asked this to our European colleagues in the previous panel. How divided are we as democracies at home? How divisive is our internal politics? And is it really making us take ineffective decisions? Are we crippled by our very loud and vibrant public sphere?
Samir, I'd be very interested in your answer to that question as regards India. I mean, it's a question for all of us. And by the way, it's not as if we all lived in blissful political harmony until a few years ago, and suddenly polarization and political divisiveness emerged. In fact, we've always had somewhat polarized and divisive and messy politics. Frankly, that's what democracy is partly about. That it's all out there in the open. There are strongly held views. There is a pluralism of opinion and views on any given issue. And the purpose of democratic institutions is to mediate those views, right? And produce compromise. The question, I think, that you're really getting at is is this undermining our strategic competitiveness? And I do think that's a concern, which is why forums like this are so important. Groups like NATO and the Quad and other settings are so important, is to remind us that actually, as democratic allies, we have very much in common, and we have a core proposition, which is that fundamentally our open societies are a source of strength. They are a source of competitiveness. They are a driving leading edge of innovation, of the fact that people around the world want to live in our open societies. They're not all flocking to China and Russia and other closed societies, right? So let's remember that our openness is a source of strength. Our pluralism is actually a source of strength. And let's work a little more domestically to create maybe a new foreign policy consensus around what we need to do that frankly rises above party and self-interest.
Thank you, Daniel. Ambassador Keshav, you heard in the previous segment from, in fact, Dr. Jaishankar as well as Minister from Portugal and the Secretary from Kenya suggest that at the end of the day, the coalitions or partnerships or groupings will be measured by what they deliver. Do you, because you have a ringside view of the Indo-Pacific, both when you were in DC and now you are in the Indian Ocean sitting in India, do you believe that Quad has what it takes to deliver on questions of development, health, security, supply chains, growth and economy? Or are we necessarily only a high-profile naval exercise?
Great question, Samir. First of all, let me go back to what Dan said about free and open societies. however you may define the Quad, I define them as the United States, India, Australia, Japan. And look at what they've already achieved. Think about the vaccines. You know, the U.S. was first to the world with all of the most effective vaccines. India has come in so strongly with other vaccines. India is, I think, producing as many as 250 million vaccines a month. And when I talk to American and Indian leaders, they always say the same things. They say, we're going to vaccinate ourselves and we're going to vaccinate the entire world. It is a bold, it is a brave, it is a positive, it is an uplifting vision of how our Quad democracies will take the world forward and how they will address the essential problems in the world. I think our nations of powerful democratic innovation are going to power the global economy forward and out of the pandemic economic crisis. They're certainly working already very effectively and at full steam on trying to help ease the health problems around the world, given the substantial donations of vaccine by both the United States and India. I do think that when our democracies work together, it's not just our governments or our babus or our politicians, it's our people. And the American people have proven that they are good at innovation. Certainly sitting here in India, I see boundless imagination and innovation every single day. And I have the highest respect for our Australian and Japanese allies and partners. And so I think the Quad is absolutely an engine for positive outcomes. These are four very like-minded democracies with an extremely high level of trust and respect for each other. And they have an ambitious vision that what's good for them is good for the entire world. And that, I think, is truly positive. And we don't want to, as Melina so eloquently said, we don't have this dark vision of, geopolitics and, sort of bringing people down and creating all sorts of, new complications. Ours is a desire to see a world of happy, prosperous, healthy, free people. And so that is something I can get behind. And I have a lot of faith in the innovation power of democracies. Over.
Thank you, Ambassador. Melina, let me turn to you for the last question of this particular segment. You heard your ministers from Europe speak about the internal conflicts. Let me ask you, and since you're an academic, you're going to be more direct. Let me ask you a slightly blunt question. Does EU have it in them to create a consensus on taking tough political decisions? Or do you think the 16+1 is challenging the EU 27 already?
So I will be very direct as usual, and I would actually describe this year when it comes to the relations of the European Union with the Indo-Pacific, and specifically with India, as probably one of the best years as seen in a context of the last 2 decades of development. So if you take into consideration the huge success derived from the European Union-India summit, the relaunch of negotiations on a free trade agreement, and much higher European Commission has with China that on hold, the European Union, together with the US, have recognized the need to be a security actor in the Indo-Pacific. So what I'm expecting is that at some point there will be probably a direct route to the Quad and joining.
I think we lost Melina there, but perhaps I think her essence was...
Interruption. Sorry for the short interruption. That was my connection. I suppose
Okay,
that,
go ahead. Is Melina here?
Process with it.
So Melina, we
Yes.
are struggling with your connection. We can't hear you at all. But let me try and complete your response on your behalf without knowing what you wanted to say. You're back with us. Go ahead. You're back with us.
Yes, sorry. Technique and pandemic, of course, you never know when it will work and when it will not work. So my point is that, of course, on the one side, it's a slow process, slow decision-making process within the European Union and the European powers. On the other side, we have strong signals when it comes to the Indo-Pacific region, and this is the region where geopolitics and geoeconomics meet. So that means that I'm expecting stronger actions, much more to happen at the level of bilateral and multilateral relations. I'm expecting the European Union and the European powers to be more active and to contribute even to Quad drills at some point, or Quad negotiations, if you like. And finally, the reconfiguration of supply chains is a moment, a great moment also for the European Union and the Indo-Pacific countries. And we should actually capitalize on this moment. That means reconfiguring supply chains away from China, moving them more towards India and other Indo-Pacific nations. And of course, there, once again, there is a great role to be played by Brussels and the European powers.
So thank you so much, Velina. I think I take away three strong messages from this particular conversation. The first, I think Ambassador Atul Keshav is the brand ambassador for the Quad grouping, and he is extremely confident that it is a group that is going to deliver. It is going to be a force for good, and it is already beginning to contribute to the region and to global developments. Daniel was quite clear that democracy matters, and democratic societies, irrespective of the debates we see on television and social media, are going to lead to outcomes that are positive and that are necessary and that are going to create benefits for people and communities and societies across the world. And Velina gives us the reassurance that the EU is in the game. It has a strong momentum to be a political actor in one of the most complex geographies of the world, the Indo-Pacific. And hopefully, EU will start contributing politically to the stability of that region as well. Thank you so much, all three of you, for joining us at the Bled Forum. And it's a pleasure to host you for this particular event. Thank you so much. Okay, one question. Go ahead.
Sorry. I'm Dimitri Zadel from Port of Koper in Slovenia, and I recently read somewhere that there will be some military maneuvers jointly between Russia and China in the Pacific area. Is this somehow true? Either this is having some impact on this process?
Ambassador Keshav, do you want to respond to that?
This was published in some newspapers.
You'll have to unmute yourself, yeah.
Yeah, no, thank you very much. Look, excellent panel, Samir, by the way. Really enjoyed the interventions with my colleagues. I feel like I'm the dumb one here. But let me just say that, look, nations have a right to engage in peaceful and lawful activities on the high seas. We believe in that. It's a fundamental bedrock principle. What we also believe in is rule of law, and we believe that there ought to be a rules-based international order, and that, larger countries shouldn't be, imposing their will in some ways. Mm-hmm. So back in 2020, the United States filed a letter with the UN Secretary General, and I think about a dozen other countries have also filed similar letters with the United Nations that essentially call into question assertions made by China, for instance, with regard to their claims in the South China Sea, and also explain and emphasize our support for international law. So when it comes to peaceful activities on the high seas that are lawful, I think you'll get no objection from the United States. When it veers into unlawful claims and unlawful activities, mm-hmm. then you're going to end up with letters like these deposited with the United Nations. And we certainly encourage other countries, if they feel the same, to deposit similar letters. I think easily a dozen or more have spoken up about these concerns. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you, and thank you for being a sport and taking a question from the audience. And please join me in applauding the interventions. And thank you once again. Thank you.